airports and or by highways, by the shipping. And so in this are two effects. On the one hand, reducing dispersal along such lines, habitat segmentation. On the other hand, the dispersal on long range, what before was a homogeneous space, is now a network of connected islands. And that's a general tendency that's happening with our ecosystems. And that gives us the importance of studying ecological phenomena on rather such networks than on the homogeneous thing. And maybe you know this picture. What's the consequences of this? If you have here two kind of networks, this is the highway network and the aviation network in the US. And the topology, of course, is very different. This is more like a lattice. And here that's your kind of scale-free network. Here, from a city, you cannot have more than 4 or 5 highways going in all directions. And the different topology of these networks is, of course, very important for the spreading of the disease. If you assume that the swine flu is entering the US from Mexico, then you would have a very different invasion pattern. If the swine flu is transmitted mainly by the highways, then you would have still this traveling wave going over the country. Whereas with the aviation network, the swine flu would appear in the different hubs of the big airports. So this tells you if we understand the network of connections, we will understand better the way in which species invade such a system. Okay, and now, that was our introduction. Now our program was to use these ideas and study invasion of marine organisms. How are marine organisms transported? And the biggest vector for transport is the ballast water in ships. So our main trade is done by shipping today. And the big ships, they are not stable on their own. They need ballast water in order to stabilize. A single ship can take something like 100,000 tons of ballast water. That's the ballast water in a big container ship. It's huge masses of water. And here you see what's happening if a ship is not stabilized. A ship can even just break apart because they're big as football fields. And if the load is not equalized on the ship, I mean, the stress is so strong they can really break. And the problem is that this ballast water is taken up from the seawater, transported with the ship over huge distances. And then in the water you have the fish larvae, or all the larvae, the eggs, and all these resting stages. And then the water is released. And now what happens? Most organisms die because they arrive in a new area where they're not adapted to. The temperature and salinity is not okay. But some of them, and that's an ecological roulette, some of them find good conditions and then they can start to grow. At very open, they don't have enemies in the new area and can spread. And this spread, I mean, this transport of the ballast water with all the organisms, that's regarded today as the biggest invasion vector of transport of species on our planet, because of the sheer amount of shipping. And here, just to show you, that's a picture of container port in Singapore. Shipping industry changed dramatically in the last decades, and it's now a nightmare, everything automatically. I mean, it's not like the romantic small port cities, but it's a real big industry, and it's just crazy. Probably Palma looks similar. Not sure. Not so big. Not.
We trade down.
But this define. I mean, that's now the goal of the study. So we want to reconstruct the connectivity of the shipping connections, and once we have this, we want to predict the spread of marine invasive species. And then it turned out that's the first problem. You don't get easy access to the shipping data. That's all secretive. So the aviation network you can more or less download, but the shipping industry, companies didn't give us the data. They told us go to the port authorities. Port authorities told us no, we cannot give you data. Why? So it was a real problem. We nearly gave up, and then we found out that there's this AIS system, automatic identification system. which was introduced 2001 for security reasons. So every ship now needs this transmitter, which transmits an ID of the ship in a local area of 30 kilometers or something. And everybody can record this ID. And so here you see, so the ship transmits this signal. And now this company, Lloyd's Register Fairplay, they collected all this information about where ships were recorded and put this all together in a database, which is still very complicated because when a ship arrives to a port, there is anchorage points, terminal points, waiting points, and all kinds of stopping positions where a ship was recorded. And you have to aggregate all this information to a single port. And some ports like Rotterdam, which are actually several different freshwater ports, saltwater port, and all, do you want to treat this as a single port or a separate port? And for the European ports, we were able to figure this out by hand, but we wanted to have a full coverage. And how do we do it with a Chinese port or Indonesian port where we don't speak the language? Well, we kind of managed to pull this data together. And then what the database gives us, for every ship, every cargo ship, we get a sequence of the ports that this ship was doing in a single year. So we constructed a single year or 2 years. So we get just this route, which gives us a small network for this single ship. We get the list of ports. We don't have any information in between. We just get the sequence, but we have the dates, the arrival, and destination times, and we have the ship ID. We know how big the ship is, and so on. So, and then we can put this all together, merge this for all ships. So we have something like 1,000 ports, 30,000 ships, and over 1 million trajectories in a single year. And now you can do all kinds of things. You can merge this on ship types, on cargo ships, oil tankers, whatever. Now studying all typical network properties, we look for degree distributions. Actually, it's a weighted network because we have the cargo between two ports. We can look, is it asymmetric? We look for strongly connected components, degree distributions, and so on. And actually, when we do this, it turns out the shipping network is not so special. It has many properties like other large-scale transportation networks. It's statistically not so much different than, let's say, the aviation network. And then you do all these tables. Actually, the most interesting point, which I didn't know, that we have these different ship types, like tankers or container ships. And these different ship types have different shipping characteristics. So, for example, the containers, they always go like a bus on a route, whereas the oil tankers more do a random walk in the network. So they have different kind of movement patterns. And then you calculate all kinds of network properties and make tables. Or you try to look for degree distributions. You see what's the typical distribution, and then we find, for example, the degree, the number of neighbors of a port. We find these broad-scale distributions. And, but also nothing special, nothing which we didn't see before. And now there was the point, like when you think, if you want to publish something like this, so it's one more broad-scale distribution, who's really interested in this? Then the point is, can we visualize this? Can we make a picture? Which is nice. And so we try the following. We don't have information for the path in between. We just have the ports. But maybe we can estimate the shipping route. If we assume the ship goes the shortest distance over open water. And actually they quite well do this. But how do you calculate this? So you have to, for a certain pair of ports on coastlines, you have to calculate the shortest geodesic path, which doesn't hit any islands and so on. You have the fractal surfaces. You have to take care, would the ship go through Suez Canal or not? What's with the Arctics? And I will later in my talk come to this. How high do you allow in the latitudes or south allow ships? But you can treat all this, and then we have now an algorithm. And if I give you a pair of ports, and then the ship calculates the trajectory. And actually, we compared this, so this algorithm works quite well, and really automatically calculates that the ship has to go a certain way to go around some obstacles. And this is for a single trajectory. And then we put this all together for all our shippings. And that's now the picture we have. So the colors give you the intensity of shipping. So you have the yellow, so you have high shipping, and red and black less shipping. And this picture now is our visualization of the trade on our planet. Yeah, so the shipping connectivity. And that was amazing. Then when we came up with this picture, suddenly the newspapers, reporters were interested. And we get still, I mean, we did this some years ago, still I get every month, I get an email from artists, from museums, and so on, people who want to get this map and for presentations, which was quite unusual for me that suddenly people were interested really in the work. And the best thing which happened is that a couple of years ago we got an email from the commander of the US forces in the Pacific. And the commander, he said, can you give us this picture centered on the Pacific, which was not so difficult. We just cut the right half and glued it on the left. It was very fast and sent it to him. And then I got an email back from the commander of the US forces. Thanks a lot. If the US forces can be of any help to us, send an email. Wow. That's not the usual emails I get as a scientist. And the lesson was that sometimes you have to try to make a good picture, a good graphical representation of your results. That's what people are interested. Even though the reporters just wanted to know what's the most dangerous parts, they were not really interested in the network structure. And actually with this plot, we lost all information about the network because here we just give a density map. The real important information that we have the history of connectivity, that's lost. But with this picture, suddenly we got a big press. And just to show you the resolution, here is the North Sea. And if we zoom this out, just to show, so you see all this different, you can even see how we go in the estuaries here to Hamburg in the rivers. So it's really highly resolved. Okay, and then we try to see how can we describe this with a gravity model, just because maybe I have time later to come to this. So if you plot the shipping activity over distance in gray, so it's a decaying function, and you can try to estimate this with such a gravity model that you say the shipping activity depends on distance in such a way, and this gives the red line. So basically the average intensity you can statistically describe by this, but if you look really at the distribution, you see there's big outliers. So on average you can describe the distance dependence, but you lose a lot of information. Okay, and here a different representation of the shipping network by short path trees, but this is just to show you that with Dirk Brockmann we did a special issue on network science, just to make a small advertisement for this special issue, but it's already known 3 years ago. And now, since we have the shipping network, the next important point would be, can we use this shipping information to calculate or estimate the bioinvasion? And as I told you before, the problem was not to take, because that the simplest thing for me, with my background, would be take a single species, take a population dynamics, start with initial conditions, start with a certain area which is already invaded by the species, and look for the spread, look like the correspondence of the Fisher traveling wave in this network. But this would not address our question. The question would be, was the rain of new species arriving in coasts? And I don't even know which species would come. So we needed a probabilistic approach. We needed for a certain area in the world the probability that new species arrive. And then when you look in the literature of bioinvasion, they tell you that you have certain specific transitions. So if you have a source community, a destination community, then first you need to introduce the new species. It has to survive the transport. The ballast tank is not the best habitat for a species, so many species die. And you can say it's about something like the survival time. It's something like exponential with the travel time, the survival probability. And then once a species managed the introduction step, it needs to establish in a new area. And the establishment depends a lot on the match of the environmental conditions, and it depends on the new community or the community which is already there. Yeah, would the new species, the species which are in the new area, would they allow a species to invade or not? And so we try to parameterize this. So we said, forget about this in the moment. So we said, okay, the probability of introduction goes exponential with travel time, exponential function. And then here we have dilutions, because in every stopover, we dilute a certain fraction of ballast water. So you have to accumulate over all dilutions in between, and that's also a big difference to the spread on aviation networks, where you usually need only the direct links between two ports or airports. But here, on every, you can have several stopovers and still transport species from a port before. And here we have a factor also which tells us about possible treatment. So ballast water could be treated, and we capture it here. And then the probability of establishment, then we say it's like Gaussian functions of temperature difference, salinity difference. So basically we have here just environmental mismatch. And possibly we have here a factor, that's the biodiversity in the new area. We could have a resistance of a community that we say a higher diverse community could be more resistant or not. But in our publications, the referees didn't want this term, so we usually take it out. But if you take in this term, we get a better estimation of real invasion spreadings. But if we, and then, okay, maybe then how does the model work? We want now to calculate the invasion of port 1 to port 2, but on the trajectory of the ship, it can come again to port 1, again to port 2, and then we have to sum up over all indirect connections from 1 to 2, and this we have to do for all ships, and that's the typical way you calculate how you sum up all the probabilities. And when we do this and calculated the risk for the North Sea, then the highest risk was the next water, the Baltic Sea. We were wondering, why the Baltic Sea, then our next water? We are not afraid of the Baltic. And why are we not afraid of the Baltic? Because every species which is there, which possibly can arrive to the North Sea, is already there. There is no alien species anymore in the Baltic. And so we forgot something. And what we forgot is the probability that the species which was transported, that this species is alien in the new community. Yeah? And so how do we get this probability to be alien? And now you can look in the ecological literature. There's something called biogeographic dissimilarity. So what's the probability that the species is alien as a function of geographic distance? And the larger separated two areas, the higher the chance that the species is not in both places. And that's a function which increases with distance. And here is the most important parameter in our model. We said this is 0 for some 100 kilometers. This means for some 100 kilometers you have homogeneous mixing. You have the same communities. And only for larger distances suddenly you have alien species. And that's the most important tuning parameter in our model. We need this. It cannot directly go up, otherwise we cannot describe real empirical data. All the other parameters are very, very robust against variations. And then when we put all this in the model, we get a map like this. Now we always try to make nice maps. And so this shows you again the connectivity on the world, but now the colors give you the invasion risk between pairs. So now it's not the shipping intensity, but the risk of invasion. And here you see in the Mediterranean, you see where the highest risk goes. And we didn't look up here in this area, but now we can study this model and look for certain areas in the world and see where is the highest risks. And so which spots have the highest risk to be invaded? So you find Asia with the big ports. You find Suez and Panama, and as the big canals. And you find ports in the US. That's the areas which have the highest risk to be invaded in our model. Astonishingly, the North Sea with the highest traffic is not there. And why? This comes because the North Sea is kind of separated from the rest of the ports in the world. And here the water is too cold compared to this tropic, subtropic waters. So basically the combination of separation, geographic separation and water temperature means that the North Sea has rather small risk compared to the shipping traffic. And so the risk here, if you rank the ports, the risk decays. Actually, and maybe somebody of you has an idea, if you plot this falls off as a power law over several orders of magnitude. I have no clue why if you forget the first ones, then why the risk should fall down as a power law. Maybe it's related to the fact how we calculate the probability as a product of many things. I have no clue. But and now we can zoom in certain areas. Here again, the spaghetti, if you have the risk between all pairs of ports, you see, okay, you see that there's typical highways, how species can invade other areas. But more interesting information we get when we zoom in. For example, here we zoom in the North Sea and plot only the invasions into the North Sea. And then suddenly we see patterns. We see the North Sea gets species only over the Atlantic. It's a very directed input. And why is this so? Here in the east coast of US and Canada, we have similar water temperatures. The distance is not too large, so species can make it, but still large enough that you have alien species here, so that's ideal. So here we have the highest number of invasions. A similar pattern you have here in the East Pacific, Northeast Pacific. Here the direction comes over the Pacific from Asia. Yeah? Very specific, only this direction. But if you go in the Northwest Pacific, it's different. Northwest Pacific gets invasions from all over the world. So here the risk is spread very big. And now we tried to show this more systematically. So we segmented the world oceans in 15 regions, and so 15 most important oceans. And so with the pie charts, you see the risks. You see actually Mediterranean has really one of the highest invaded regions in the world. And the pies show you from which areas you get the risk. But you see it better in this graph here. So here we have the total risk of an area to be invaded. And here we have the evenness. How is the risk spread over all other ecoregions? And then we have areas, and the Mediterranean is also here, where we have high risk and spread all over. We have areas like West Indo-Pacific where we have high risk, but it comes, or Northeast Pacific, very specific. The North Sea is something in the middle, and we have areas which low risk. So we can now classify the world regions into systematic risk categories. Okay, or we can aggregate this to such a network of ecoregions. How would this compare to data? I mean, that's all the model. I mean, then of course you have to ask, what does the data tell you? The problem with data is that how do you get information about the invasion pathways? One thing is to find out that the species is invasive here. The other thing is to where did it arrive from. And we found only 4 studies where they really detailed looked for all marine invasive species in this area and try to calculate where did they come from. Like North Sea, Pearl Harbor, Port Phillips Bay in Australia, and San Francisco. And below are the reported data, and above this is our model predictions. And the colors give the different oceans, so of origin. And actually this pattern, the agreement was remarkable well. This is now tuned, where we tuned the parameters, but even without tuning it looked the same, so parameter tuning didn't do so much.
Which are the parameters of the model?
If you have exponential time of survival, so you have how long would a species survive in the ballast time? What is this radius of homogeneous communities? How many kilometers you have homogeneous things? You have environmental mismatch. How large can the temperature difference in waters can be that a species still makes it? That's the parameters. And so we took, like for temperature, we looked for some 5 degrees or something, that would be typical temperature differences species can do, and so on. Took standard parameters and directly worked like this. And actually, sometimes where the data doesn't work so well, or the comparison is not so well, for example, here in San Francisco, I mean, first it looks right, but this big bar is shifted, it's not in the right point. But this is in the data, that's transport from the West Atlantic to the east coast of the US. And then we say, okay, actually our model is okay, the data is wrong. And why? Because probably the data has inland invasions over the inland transport, whereas our model only describes the shipping intensity. So where we have not a good agreement, very often we find that maybe the model, the data captured something different. And then there's a problem that this data describes the invasions which have built up over the shipping of the last 20 years, whereas our model predicts the invasions to come in the future, and shipping changed a lot. So actually this agreement is much better than I would dare that such an agreement can be. So actually we find quite good agreement to data. And then we found the following pattern. Then in our model, that's here, we plotted the invasion risk versus distance, and we found this intermediate distance. And then we looked in the data and found, oh, it's also in the data, but nobody cared to plot it in this way. So we find the highest number of invasions for intermediate distances on the planet. And we can explain it in our model terms. For large distances, you don't have so much trade, and the survival on the trade is small. And for small distances, you don't have alien species. And this together gives you intermediate, the highest risk at intermediate distances. And just to make a small interlude, so we tried this also happens for other invasions. So now we speak not only about marine, in all invasive species, we look in the invasive species database, and that's the black curve, and look for all reported invasions of species on Earth. What is the number of invaded species as a function of distance, and we get this intermediate distance. The problem, of course, is when you take a sphere, and you would look in the sphere, what is the highest number of points which connect, like if I'm the North Pole, then with a distance of 10,000 kilometers, if you have a fourth of the circumference of the Earth, you have the highest number of points. So just by coincidence, you have also geometry would tell you that you would have the highest number of invasions with something like 10,000 kilometers. And so if we randomize our ports, we get a curve like this. But if you look now, you have to look more carefully. Species can only come by trade, invasive species. And the trade numbers, you look for trade, that decays with distance. And now how with such a, if this is trade with distance, how can you have such invasion numbers with distance? And then this can only work if we have, again, our probability to be alien again, which increases with geographic distance. So that's one of the things now we try to extend from the marine invasions to general invasions of species. But going back to the marine stuff, now one of the big problems is that many people don't want this invasive species. That's a big economic problem. So what do? Now people say, okay, we have to clean the ballast water. And many countries have signed already a contract. And if enough countries have signed the contract, then this will go into active status. And then only ships which have cleaned the ballast water allowed to enter these countries. I'm not sure if Spain signed this, but Germany signed this. And this would mean that if now enough countries have signed this, only ships with ballast water facilities can arrive German waters. And now if you look for a big tanker, these facilities you can filter or do all kind of toxins or something to clean the ballast water. This can be 500,000 euros to install such a unit on a ship. And now if we speak over 1,000, 10,000 of ships, that's huge money involved to establish the fleet of ships with this ballast water. And now our idea was now, can a little bit of modeling help here to make some plannings, like can we make a targeted installation of this ballast water cleanment things. And so you can make no cost-benefit curves in the model where we play with all kinds of things. For example, here we just said in every ship we clean a certain fraction of water, and when you clean a certain fraction of water, then you see how much is the risk reduced, and already with small cleaning you get already substantial effort. And that's also, this treatment effort is also the problem for people when they want to filter water. How good do you have to filter water? How many organisms really can are allowed to remain in the ballast water? And that's now a big issue, and we hope that modeling approaches might help you in the future. Here a small video to show you, that's now a population dynamics model where we started in Korea. And you see very fast you have these white spots. So the color gives you the density. You have white spots in all parts in the world. You have some species.
What's the time scale?
It's no, it's not realistic time scale. So it's arbitrary. Just to show you that first, on this arbitrary time scale, you have species everywhere. But here's a model with an allele threshold, and it takes quite long to reach over the allele threshold to get orange and red. To show, because one of the puzzles of people were, why do you sometimes set so large time scales in order that the population can establish something? And this goes together if you have this allele threshold that you suddenly need a critical density to really establish. And this you can see in such models. And this is a model without environmental parameters. And here I have a model where we include temperature differences in the system, and then you see only you get invasions in a similar latitude where you have similar water temperatures. So now we have species or organisms everywhere, but establishments only in such a corridor, and later one species, one port in the North Sea is suddenly here it's establishing, so in Rotterdam. Just to so we play also with this kind of stuff. Another outlook, so what's the recent activities what we do? In the moment when you look in the newspapers, many people speak about the melting of the Arctic ice. So that's satellite photos in the Arctic ice in winter and summer. And you see in summer, ice is melting so much that ships already can go. And the ship numbers, trading ship numbers are exponentially increasing in time. And now the question is, since we have the shipping network and all this, can we say something about shipping activities for this? And so we look here for 3 ice scenarios. One is a completely blocked ice, one is where the coast is free, and the other is where the Arctic would be totally ice-free. And then we have this algorithm I showed you before when I have 2 ports, one in Asia, here one in Europe, and I can automatically calculate this path. It's just an algorithm. And now in my algorithm I can allow that ships go through either here in this scenario or even go totally through an ice-free Arctic. And so I can calculate the change in distances between ports in the world. And this we did now for all pairs of ports, and then you see what's happening. So you see the number of routes which are shortened and over a function of geographic distance, and you see all small routes are not changed. But when you go to large distances, then substantial changes appear. And now we can see who will be the winner and loser of Arctic melting. And for example, that's something we just started. You see, that's ports which have a reduction in distance. So this will be probably the winners of this, and other ports don't see a benefit in distance to all others. Many companies have now to clean the water. Can we, with such modeling approaches, find optimal strategies to which ships should be have these facilities? One problem is with the invasion risk in the tropics. Now, some people tell us our model would over-predict the risk in the tropics, and that goes again to the question: what we totally forgot is the community resistance. So we just say species can arrive in a port or in an area, but we don't know what community is already there. And now the question is, would a diverse community be more resistant than a not so diverse community? And that's very strongly debated among ecologists, and there's no big debate. And the other, so some people say there's more invasions in the tropics, no, less invasions in the tropics than we predict from the model. But then the tropics are not studied so well. So like we had the data in San Francisco where we had a lot of reported invasions, but San Francisco is one of the best studied waters. And so the field ecologists tell me every time they go there and sample, they find new species. So when you sample 100 times, you should have 100 times, not 100, but more species found. And that's the question, is the sampling effect or is there really biotic resistance does play a role? The other thing is here opening of Arctic passengers. So we think that will be very important for many people. Nobody looked at this from a global point of view. And yeah, and we extend all these models now to terrestrial invasions to see the network of trade between countries. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the next one. So, questions or comments?
I was wondering, is there no saturation of invasion because you had so much trade with the in the shipping networks in the past that you would think that maybe the seeds of all possible invasions could have been set?
No, it's not yet. What we don't have, you still what's even happening is the secondary invasions. So you have first the introduction of a new area, and then by smaller boats or something, you have the secondary invasions which we cannot capture. And this is a process which is very relevant in the moment, but it's not at all saturated. We're still in the process. And the thing is, like, there is a time delay, it's called this invasion depth, between the establishment of a new trade route and the establishment of new species, and this is something like 20 to 50 years. And the trade routes, they really were booming up like something like 20 years ago when there were big changes to the Asian economy. And we're in the moment seeing the consequences. It's just starting. So no saturation yet.
I have two questions. The first is when you calculate the invasion risk between port A and B, is it perfectly bidirectional in your model, or is there an asymmetry also possible, like that there's a high probability to invade from A to B than vice versa?
I mean, from the shipping network is not symmetric. Yeah, so shipping intensities are not symmetric. That's
your final outcome, your invasion risk.
No, it's not symmetric, not at all. Basically, because of the shipping, and if we, but otherwise the model would be symmetric. But we have also the diversity in the destination community. If you take this into account, that's not symmetric. But usually we don't take it into account. Then everything would be symmetric, but the shipping intensity is not.
Okay, and my second question would be, you took into account the difference, for instance, of temperatures between port A and B. But if a ship is passing through tropic waters, maybe it's higher probability that the species dies in between. That's
a systematic thing we didn't put in yet. This could be very important if you go from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere and go through hot waters, or in the other way around. If you go now to the Arctic and go through very cold waters, would this have a problem? We don't know. There's many interesting things also with the time periodicity, because like if algae species, they have the blooming event. So it doesn't, it strongly depends on which season the ship takes the water. Do you take the water when the algae just bloom or after the bloom? And now if you release the water, it also depends what are the nutrient conditions when you release. But is the native community already established or not? So then you get interesting perspectives. If you zoom in, there's a lot which can be improved here.
Just for curiosity, what was the driving force behind introducing these water filters? Is there really an economic calculation behind, or was this ecological?
No, it's economic. I mean, there's huge costs. Like, for example, this Tricina. There's
There's also huge benefits.
In new species arriving.
No, the people selling the.
Yeah. Of course. There's a big market here, right? But it's there. I mean, the driving force is the International Maritime Organization, and I think they're. I'm not sure. I think they're non-commercial. The point is that that there is big and economic problems, like this Caspian Sea, where the whole fishery collapsed, or a small. There are all these pipelines, and the cleaning costs are enormous, and that's invasive species. Like they have one species in Brazil which went all the Amazonas thing up, and in all the power plants it's an invasive species. And the other, the Trisena, went in the Canada and the US lakes, and it's big costs. Yeah, so in the North Sea, so far, we have an enrichment of diversity. It's everything nice. I don't know. In Mediterranean, I don't know. I think, but still, I think that in the Mediterranean there are also economic costs. I don't know how. It's one of. I mean, there's many people that, because the Mediterranean is one of, but more the East Mediterranean, one of the strongest invaded places, and many people are really concerned that bad things are happening. But I'm not sure what really the costs are.
More questions?
Is there such a word for airborne vectors through plane? You know, at a global scale where you have things in the air, like planes grabbing the air from one place and flying to another place?
No, not like this. There they have people do this with the diseases, yeah, where people get this infectious disease, like swine flu or whatever, and spread it over the world. Actually, these disease models were the motivation for our study.
Well, you can think about insects. Or
but not by.
Where you fly, you put some insecticide in the plane before you fly over.
Right. Yeah, actually, and you have the malaria of the airport, like Frankfurt area. Sometimes you have such cases, but it's not the air; it's container material mostly. Where you think, but the trade by airplanes is much smaller than the trade by ships. So for the airplanes, the most important thing is
the quantity of things they carry. Because the trade, there are a lot of traffic too, I guess.
Yeah, but in the quantity, like more than 90% is traded by ships. Okay. So for the airports, I mean, the most important is that people get infectious diseases and spread this.
Question? I have a question. Is that this invasion process is really delicate because you have to go to a place which is sufficiently similar to yours to survive.
Right,
At least you should go to a place which is sufficiently dissimilar from yours to establish and to have some advantage on the other. So there should be some effect of rare events. I mean, some large and very strange fluctuations may be determinant. How is stochastics introduced into your model?
No, they're not at all. No, they're not. Maybe I can answer in two ways, because that's actually probably what's happening. We have this strong, because if you go to a similar place, you don't manage. But once when you manage in a dissimilar place, and you have this rare event, and then you have these big things, and when people say something bad is happening, that's one of these rare fluctuations. Over a larger ecological time, the enemy will also come. I mean, the ecologists say then you have enemy release. So you manage to go in a new place, and you're the only one, and you can spread like you want. Like in the Caspian Sea, where the jellyfish arrived. And then some years later, the predator jellyfish was invaded also, and then everything stabilized again. So if you wait a little bit, some other come and ecology might stabilize the system again. But you're right, and if you see the rare fluctuations, and that's usually not something you like to have. The other thing is, like for fluctuations, when we tried our population dynamic models. Yeah? So for me it was clear we need Ali threshold, because we speak about very small densities in a new port, so Ali threshold should be important. And then I thought, okay, what kind of noise do I need? And I thought, okay, we have small numbers, maybe I need demographic noise. But actually, if you have a least threshold, you anyhow go to extinction, typically. If you have a community which has zero abundance, and then sometimes by immigration you get some new species, but you have a least threshold, you go down to zero immediately. So all the demographic noise was not important at all. And it turned out the important noise factor is really the fluctuations by immigration. So the immigration as a function of time is a noisy variable, and that is the irrelevant noise in such a population dynamic. Not in this risk model. It's included when we make the population dynamic model.
Any other question or comment? If not, thank you again.